Camilla's side of the story. Her love affair with Prince Charles rocked the monarchy. Now friends reveal he begged her to call off her wedding, wept the night before he married Diana, and how she was convinced to go back to him to preserve his sanity. The Mail today lifts the lid on the love affair between Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles, telling her side of the story for the first time. An explosive biography details the heir to the throne's decades-long infatuation with Camilla and his tormented marriage to the Princess of Wales. The book is written by Britain's top royal author Penny Junor, who was able to speak to Camilla's family and her confidantes. Charles is said to have begged Camilla to call off her wedding to her first husband and to have wept the night before his marriage to Diana. The book says a lady-in-waiting to the Queen, who had known of the prince's misgivings, had stood with him at a Buckingham Palace window watching the crowds and them all with tears streaming down their faces. The story of the enduring affair that rocked the monarchy is being serialized today and all next week in the Mail. One night, at a dinner party, the woman sitting next to Andrew Parker Bowles turned to him and smiled. "I'm really hurt, Andrew," she said teasingly. "I'm the only one of Camilla's friends you haven't made a pass at. What's wrong with me?" Everyone who knew the Parker Bowles well was aware of Andrew's serial unfaithfulness to Camilla, but it was passed off as a bit of a joke. It was nothing of the kind, of course. All too often, the women were indeed friends of his wife, and showed scant loyalty to her by succumbing to his charms. Yet Camilla never seemed to blame them or even have any stormy showdowns with Andrew. There was never a tense atmosphere in the couple's home, no barbed comments or bitter exchanges. Andrew's affairs were just a fact of life and not something Camilla often spoke about. It was only those closest to her who knew quite how standoffish and cold Andrew could be towards her, and how deeply, bitterly hurt she was by his infidelity. She loved him, for reasons her own family could never entirely fathom, and longed to be truly loved in return. But she didn't feel she was. There was always someone prettier, wittier, sexier, waiting to take her husband away from her. It wasn't that Andrew Parker Bowles was reacting against the ties of marriage. He had been unfaithful even when they were just going out. A Deb's delight par excellence, Andrew was then 25 and a rather beautiful officer in the household cavalry. Not only was he charming, smooth-talking and debonair but, thanks to his army training and riding, he was slim and fit. Another attraction was that he had noble blood and connections with royalty going back generations. His parents, particularly his father, Derek, were close friends of the Queen Mother, and in 1953, at the age of 13, Andrew had been a page boy at the Queen's coronation. Now, most of the upper-class women in London seemed to be after him, some of them married and he knew it, and reaped the benefits. Camilla, hugely popular with boys from an early age, had caught his eye at her coming-out party and he had certainly caught hers. But they didn't meet again until 1966, at a dance in Scotland. He went over to her and said simply, "Let's dance." They danced, and she fell in love. It was the start of a long, torturous romance, torturous because Camilla became a puppet on a string. Andrew was hugely fond of her and she was nominally his girlfriend, spending many weekends with him at his parents' house near Newbury in Berkshire. But he couldn't resist other women. And what was particularly hurtful was that, even then, many of them were Camilla's friends. Occasionally, she retaliated. One night she spotted Andrew's car parked outside the flat of one of her best friends, so she wrote a rude message in lipstick on the windscreen and let all the air out of his tires. But, curiously for such a strong and confident woman, Camilla largely put up with his behavior, possibly because she has also always been determined and stubborn. Once she had made up her mind she wanted to marry Andrew, nothing was going to stop her. 5 years later, however, there had still been no proposal. It was at this point that a good friend of Camilla's decided that she needed to meet the young and shy Prince of Wales. Lucius Santa Cruz, a glamorous Chilean historian, had got to know Charles 3 years before when he was an undergraduate at Trinity College, Cambridge. Back then, she had been working as a research assistant to the master of his college, Lord Butler. It was Butler, a friend of Lucia's father, the Chilean ambassador who had invited her to dinner at the master's lodge to meet the prince, thinking they might enjoy one another's company. They did, they became lifelong friends, but never in a romantic way. Although Lucia has repeatedly been credited with being the prince's first lover, this could not be farther from the truth. She already had a serious boyfriend, Juan Luis Sosa Balmas, now her husband, and Charles is godfather to their eldest son. By 1971, Lucia's parents had returned to Chile and she was living on the first floor of Stack House, a block of flats in Ebery Street, Belgravia. One floor below, Camilla was sharing a flat with her friend the Honorable Virginia Carrington, whose father was the conservative politician Lord Carrington. Lucia and Camilla already knew one another socially, they moved in the same circles, but as neighbors they became good friends. They were in and out of each other's flats every day, borrowing clothes, going to the same parties and dances, and at weekends Camilla would take her friend down to her parents' house in the East Sussex countryside. With her own parents so far away, this meant a great deal to Lucia. The Shans were warm and welcoming, even inviting her to spend Christmas with them and leaving a pillowcase full of presents at the end of her bed. Inevitably, Lucia knew all about her friend's troubles with Andrew, and felt she deserved better. The introduction to Prince Charles was easy to arrange. One evening in 1971, when Lucia and the prince had already arranged to go out together, she asked him to arrive early. She had just the girl for him, she added, describing Camilla as having enormous sympathy, warmth and natural character. In Lucia's first-floor flat that evening, there was an immediate attraction between Camilla and the prince, and an instant rapport. He loved the fact that she smiled with her eyes as well as her mouth, and laughed at the same silly things as he did. He also liked that she was so natural and easy and friendly, not in any way overawed by him, not fawning or sycophantic. In short, he was very taken with her, and after that first meeting he began ringing her up. Then they started seeing each other. But it was a busy time for him, and he was seldom at home. At 22, Charles was in the midst of intensive military training. He just qualified as a jet pilot with the Royal Air Force, and won membership of the exclusive 10-ton club by flying at more than 1,000 miles per hour. He'd also scared himself half to death by jumping out of an aircraft at 12,000 feet, only to find that his parachute had wrapped itself round his feet. Fortunately, he'd had the presence of mind to disentangle himself in time to descend harmlessly into the sea at Studland Bay in Dorset. After his stint as a pilot, he'd embarked on a career in the Royal Navy, which entailed joining the destroyer HMS Norfolk for 9 months, though he spent some of that time doing shore-based training courses in Portsmouth. In the event, it wasn't until the late autumn of 1972, when Andrew Parker Bowles was away with his regiment, that Charles was on dry land for long enough to hook up with Camilla. Soon, they were seeing one another whenever the opportunity presented itself. This was quite often at Smith's Lawn, the Guards Polo Club in Windsor Great Park, where both Charles and Andrew played for a time in the same team. Camilla had been a regular sight at polo matches for years, watching Andrew and his friends play, and the father of one of her friends was chairman of the club. So she could go and watch Charles play without arousing particular attention. By then, Andrew was serving in Northern Ireland, and this posting was followed by one to Cyprus. So for the last months of 1972, Charles had Camilla to himself. And the two of them enjoyed some very happy times together, quite often at Broadlands, the Hampshire family seat of Charles's beloved great-uncle, Lord Mountbatten. How did the old Earl react to their trysts? In one sense, he was only too happy to play host to the pair, but he also made it abundantly clear to Charles that this relationship could never go anywhere in the long term. Camilla was not sufficiently aristocratic to be the prince's wife, and she was not a virgin, which to Mountbatten was a prerequisite. Charles, however, was falling ever more deeply in love. And although far too reticent to say anything to Camilla, he was beginning to feel that, despite Mountbatten's warnings, he might have found someone with whom he could share his life. The only cloud on his horizon was that in the new year, He was due to leave for the Caribbean in the frigate HMS Minerva, which would take him away for at least 8 months. 3 weeks before Christmas, he duly joined his new ship, and invited both Mountbatten and Camilla for a tour of inspection and lunch. The weekend before he sailed, he was again at Broadlands with her, but he said nothing to indicate the strength of his feelings about her. This was perhaps just as well, because she may not have known how to respond. She was hugely fond of Charles and flattered by his attention. They'd had a very good time together, but Camilla was still in love with Andrew, who'd now returned to Britain. To her fury, the man she adored, while still nominally her boyfriend, was now seeing Princess Anne, Charles's feisty younger sister. This wasn't out of character, of course. Andrew had never been known to date just one girl at a time. True, Andrew had never been very nice to her. During the 7 years they'd been going out together, he'd never made her feel special, and his playing around had hurt her to the core. Even so, she was still stubbornly determined to marry him. The fact that every other woman in London fancied him only made him more attractive to her. She adored him, and she had been dating him through thick and thin for 7 years. She wanted to be Mrs. Parker Bowles, wife of her handsome cavalry officer, not Princess of Wales, not Queen. As for Andrew, he was fully aware that his relationship with Princess Anne could never end in marriage. However much in love they may have been, he was a Roman Catholic, and the 1701 Act of Succession expressly forbade any potential heir to the throne to marry a Roman Catholic. For her part, Princess Anne, at that time fourth in line, wasn't about to cause a constitutional crisis. Eventually, she turned her attentions to the man she later married, Mark Phillips, a captain in the Queen's Dragoon Guards, and a 3-day eventer who just won a gold medal at the Montreal Olympics in 1972. For a moment, Andrew, who knew about Charles, must have thought he was about to lose both his girlfriends. So in March 1973, while the prince was thousands of miles away in the West Indies, Andrew, now aged 33, finally asked Camilla to marry him. She accepted. Then she wrote to Charles herself to tell him. Her letter broke the prince's heart. In great distress, he fired off anguished letters of his own to his nearest and dearest. It seemed to him particularly cruel, he wrote in one letter, that after such a blissful, peaceful and mutually happy relationship, fate had decreed that it should last a mere 6 months. He hadn't fought Rommel's tanks like her father, but in 1969 she'd watched him ride in the 129th Grand National, on a horse called the Fosse. It is one of the most dangerous and challenging races over jumps in the world, and out of a field of 30 that year, only 14 finished. He was 11th. By comparison, Charles at 24 was still a work in progress and would never match Andrew's confidence or his masculinity. It is no surprise that at the time she found him the more appealing. The wedding went ahead on July 4, 1973, shortly before her 26th birthday. She looked glorious in a traditional white dress, with a 10-feet train, by Belleville Sassoon. Her bridesmaids wore many versions of her gown, while the page boys were in 19th-century military uniforms. The guest list included some of the most illustrious names in the country, among them the Queen Mother, Princess Margaret, and Andrew's ex, Princess Anne. Charles was also invited but didn't come, claiming another engagement. Those close to him assumed that he stayed away for another reason. He simply couldn't bear to watch the woman he loved walk down the aisle with someone else. The prince is cursed by the need to have personal protection officers, PPOs, with him at all times, and he also has a team of people to look after him, plan logistics and organize his diary, even his social diary. He can do nothing without someone knowing where he is and who he's seeing, and the royal court is a hotbed of gossip, as it always has been, and always will be. Some of those closest to him began to voice their suspicions that Camilla had been added to the list of women who were more than just friends. Members of his own family picked up on it and warned that if news got out, it could be very damaging, not just to him as Prince of Wales but also to the institution. The days are long gone when princes could flagrantly exercise a royal droit de seigneur and sleep with other men's wives, as Edward VII had done, and the once compliant press could no longer be relied upon to protect the crown from scandal. But by then, Charles was far too dependent on Camilla to be warned off by the risk of discovery.